All right, welcome back everybody to another episode of New Agreements. I guess you could say this is the first of season 2 because we've taken a bit of a break. I went on a cycle ride, been doing some videos on Shell, and we are back today with Christian from Regen Network from the Bay Area today. How you doing, Christian?
Really good. Thanks for having me, David.
Really pleased to have you. And I received an email the other week saying that you guys are in a new chapter around your platform. And it seemed like there was a real good alignment there. So I thought, let's just do this. Sometimes you sit around and strategize and decide it's time to do a podcast. And then sometimes you think, it seems to be starting. So let's just go with the flow and make it happen. Why don't you take us back for a second? We got some time. Why don't you just tell us, where did you grow up? What is the journey that you meandered along that led you to be sitting in this chair as CEO of the network today?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, David. Well, interestingly enough, right when I graduated university, I told myself, I'm not going to have a career. Careers are so 1900s, and I'm much more creative than that. I gathered a group of friends together and we bought some property in northern Thailand. And what I imagined was that we were just going to build a few bamboo bungalows, put up some hammocks, get a margarita mixer, and call it good. But it turned out we needed to figure out how to grow the mangoes that would go into our margarita mixer and how to build our bamboo bungalows. And so that project turned into a permaculture education center, natural building education center. And the Panya project is what it's called. It's north of Chiang Mai, Thailand. It still runs to this day.
Wow.
Hosting high school kids, hosting permaculture design courses, hosting natural building courses. And through that process, I got really involved in regenerative agriculture, through the pathway of permaculture.
Well, just before you go on, I'm just going to say you win the award for best intro on this podcast out of all the 12, 15 people we've had that are all been amazing. You win because you're living the dream there. What, you're young mid-20s and you convinced a bunch of mates to give you a bunch of cash and go with you over there.
My family moved to Thailand when I was 12. So I went through middle school and high school in Thailand, and I felt comfortable with the Thai culture and the Thai people. And I knew that it was totally possible to move there, engage with the local community. There's some tricks to buying property in Thailand, but it's possible, and make something happen. So I knew that physical aspect of it was possible. Now getting my friends involved was an extra challenge because none of us had any money. So I literally wrote up this 7-page proposal that said, in 2 years from now, you need to give me $2,000. And we're going to buy the land with that. Another 2 years from now, you're going to give me another $3,000. And at that point, we're going to build the infrastructure on the site. We ended up getting 11 people involved. So we had about $55,000 total to spend. And in the end, I actually ended up giving everyone back $1,000 because we didn't need that amount of money to start.
And was that the amount of money needed to acquire the property and build the first huts, or?
Yeah, it was. We spent about $45,000, told about half of that to acquire the property. What we did was we built earthen buildings. I learned how to build adobe. I learned how to build cob and wattle and cob. So it cost a lot less money, and was really, really enjoyable process to bring folks in, host natural building workshops, and get covered in mud and build our infrastructure.
And I know I'm really going into this, but I have a personal interest in it. Was it a requirement of your 10 friends that they also did work, or was the requirement only that they put the money in?
I said, this will become whatever we make it. And so you need to put the money in, and there's no way you're ever going to get your money back. You can't sell your share to someone. You can't transfer it. That's part of the deal. That's the complexity I didn't want. But you don't have to put any time and effort in. If you never come there, that's fine. It's too bad. I'd rather have you, but if that's what it works out, that's fine. And whoever goes there and puts in the effort and turns this place into an amazing project will receive, all the joy and learning and everything that comes along with that. We hosted Jeff Lawton, a permaculture design teacher out of Australia, for our first design course back in 2005, I believe, or 2006. I didn't know who the guy was, but he's an incredible teacher. He inspired me heavily. And ever since that point, my life has been wrapped up in ecological agriculture, regenerative agriculture, permaculture, and the economics around ecology.
there must have been a moment where, okay, you've rallied your pals, you've built some huts, and it's kind of like there's a bit of creative life, but it could be tailing off. And there must have been a moment where it felt like, oh, this thing's going to get established, actually. This thing is going to find a rhythm and a flow of capital, of people and finance that's going to sustain it and let it become that permaculture hub that you're describing. And what was that, if there was that, what was the ingredient that kind of went, oh, now it's really going to go long term?
I guess it's a combination of the economics of hosting courses that both bring in a little bit of capital into the project, but also build the infrastructure and build the community at the same time. Because oftentimes we would host courses where paying students would come. We would build a building with them as part of the workshop, and then they would stay after as a volunteer for the next 3 months. You know, and there was really great energy. You know, everybody really engaged, wake up every morning and have a morning meeting and like, what are we doing today? Some people are in the garden, some people are in building, some people are, you know, heading into town to do a shopping run. You know, and then we'd have dance parties in the evenings, and we had a lot of fun. There was definitely challenges as well, but at some point we got to a point where we were hosting about 6 courses a year. The project was never set out to make anybody their retirement or anything like that, but what it did was those courses provided enough funds so that all the people that were living there could live there throughout the year without having to spend their own money to be there. That was really, really amazing.
Did you live full time? Did you live there full time, and how long for? And how long of your permaculture journey, regenerative agriculture journey, has been there? And then where did you go from there then, I guess?
So I lived there full time for about 5 years, starting in 2005. And previously I lived in Thailand for 6 years in middle school and high school, as I mentioned. And then after those 5 years, I started tailing off my time at the Panya Project. So then I spent a half a year, and then I came back for just 3 months. And then I just would come to teach a permaculture design course, check in on the community, and then head out. That's part of the journey. So after living at the Panya Project and gaining a bunch of skills in permaculture design, working with farmers in the local area, and doing a little bit of regional permaculture design work, I then met up with Eric Tonesmeyer, who's the author of Edible Forest Gardens and the Carbon Farming Solution. I met up with Ethan Rowland, who's an incredible leader in the regenerative ag space. I met up with Gregory Landway, who later became my business partner on 2 different businesses, including the current business, and a woman named Mary Johnson, who's a farm economist and you know, business planning for farm scale. She's still very wrapped up in the world of regenerative agriculture with Green America and others. We then formed a company called Terragenesis International. And it was more like a collective of designers saying like, hey, each of us have our areas of expertise. Why don't we start a company, start a brand, and start all working under this same label of Terragenesis International and see what happens? And that was about 11 years ago. And that company is still running and going strong. And it was out of that company, after working with a number of natural products brands, that we started Regen Network.
Okay.
Yeah.
So before we go Regen Network, just to establish a couple of key terms that you've spun in there. We've heard about regenerative agriculture through a previous podcast. When you talk about permaculture, what are you specifically referring to for somebody who hasn't heard of it before?
Yeah, permaculture is a design science that uses natural systems to benefit the way that humans are interacting with ecosystems, and ultimately designed to re-intertwine us with natural systems. So oftentimes that looks like, you know, how do you design your backyard and your living space so that it, rather than working against nature, like trying to fight off all the natural systems to make a pretty, you know, garden.
Yeah.
How do you work with the natural systems and what naturally wants to rise there to end up producing food and fiber and fuel and other needs for yourself and your family? But that can then extend to farm level and landscape level as well, where we're really thinking about, you know, the patterns of nature. What are those principles and patterns that nature expresses that we can learn from and employ in our efforts to feed ourselves and to live harmoniously with this planet? Permaculture has been around since the late 1970s, and I definitely encourage people who are just thinking about trying to re-intertwine themselves with nature a little bit more. look into permaculture, take a permaculture design course. It's a 2-week long introduction course, and it's like a life changer for a lot of people.
I remember looking at some permaculture diagrams where, it seems like the homestead is built in concentric circles, in line with what you're saying about trying to design harmoniously with the natural flow of life with nature. But that often leads to these kind of concentric circles where the stuff that needs the least amount of management, let's say like trees that only yield stuff and need pruning now and again, are on the outside, and then stuff that needs close, intimate management is closer into where the humans are, where they're going to be living and staying. Is that kind of true, or is that a bit of a oversimplification?
Well, it's both. I mean, it's oversimplification, but it is. That's the zoning system in permaculture. One of the biggest mistakes people make when they first take on homesteading project or farming project is that they think that they need to manage everything really strongly. They end up like planning, we're going to put really intensive orchards everywhere. We're going to put really intensive gardens everywhere, and they just get completely overwhelmed. So the zoning system says, okay, we're going to start one step out your kitchen door. What are you going to plant right there, right next to your kitchen? You're going to have your basil and your coriander and your things that you can pick frequently for cooking. And then we're going to expand out from there, and we're going to manage that zone 1 garden where all your veggies are that you're going to be frequently harvesting from. We're going to manage that very heavily, visiting it every day or multiple times a day. And then we're going to expand out to something that has a little bit less management, and then out to your pastures with your animals, then out to your timber, and then what they call zone 5 is the wild area. And a part of the vision of permaculture is that the largest area is wild area. So if we could implement this across a watershed or across the planet, we would have majority wild area, so that our ecology and our water systems and our animals can all have their space as well.
Sounds amazing. So then thanks for just like clarifying that up. And so tell us about Regen Network then. What is it? Where are you at? What's going on?
Yep, absolutely. So Regen Network is a full stack development software company that aims on developing the infrastructure for the commons, really managing the commons. So what do I mean by that? Well, we have our atmosphere, our climate, we have our oceans, we have our forests. In the current system, the way that those things are managed are through a bunch of disparate, disconnected, closed silos of data and information, so that these different parties, like the US government is trying to work with corporations who are trying to work with individuals and philanthropists and nonprofits. And each of them has their own understanding of what is actually happening in the ocean or in the atmosphere, right? So, and then they try to come to agreements about how to engage with those places, which is totally does not work, and clearly is not working for our atmosphere and our oceans and our ecologies, right? So,
and I guess in many instances as well, not only are they not only are they holding that data in a centralized way, like behind their closed doors, but they're protecting it. They want to charge for it. They want to make money and get a return from it or whatever. They're not necessarily capturing it for the common good. They might be capturing it for other reasons as well.
Oftentimes these parties have adversarial relationships with each other as well. So not only are they protecting their data for profit, but they're also protecting their data because they have a particular outcomes they want to see. So when a corporation is engaging with a government, they're working with regulators. The government may be politicized in some way, like as we're currently seeing, especially here in the US, the EPA has particular outcomes that may differ from the outcomes that other parties are wanting to see. So they're each holding different amounts of data, releasing only parts of that data so they can argue their side of it. And what this has resulted in is ecological devastation on this planet. And it continues to result in that.
Yeah, how does the commons help with that then?
So if we are going to be making proper agreements about commons management, we need to have a infrastructure to interact on. So data interoperability, so there's transparency to the data of what's really happening, community governance of that infrastructure, so that if there is data and information coming through there, all parties can look at it and say, okay, none of the other parties that I'm adversarial with are being able to, alter or lever what is happening inside of that community governed space.
So when we're talking commons, I mean, often we hear commons referred to in terms of intellectual property, so, or cultural property, like items that have been generated out of society that now anyone can use because there's no, like, you don't have to pay to use it because it's in the commons. But you're referring to like the natural commons, the air and the seas and the stuff that we all need in our ecology. Do you call it the ecological commons or what? I mean, and am I right? That's what you're referring to, right? Our natural resources that we all share and we all need to know about.
Absolutely. That's the one, that's the space that we are primarily focused on. But in the end, even our technological infrastructure becomes part of the commons. Right? So once we launch our SDK and our distributed ledger, that technological toolkit goes into the commons and becomes managed by a commons group, where anyone can then participate in the governance of it if they have an interest in participating. So yeah, natural commons is what we're focused on, but it goes beyond that.
Interesting. Okay, cool. What are the tools you're building and how far along are you and what are you trying to do next?
There's two levels to what Regen Network is building. First is that commons development toolkit. We call a software development toolkit, including a distributed ledger, including community governance, including data interoperability tools, et cetera. That set of tools can be used for many, many different applications. We've explored insurance applications and banking applications, government applications, and other things. The first application that we're building on top of that toolkit is a carbon registry and an ecosystem services registry. So this is something that most of your viewers are probably at least somewhat familiar with, is carbon markets and carbon credits. So the very first application we're building is that, and we've issued our first carbon credits for a regenerative agriculture ranch in New South Wales, Australia. It's called a Carbon Plus Grasslands Credit, and it measures carbon in the soil using satellite-powered remote sensing and minimal ground truth data. It measures animal welfare, soil health, and ecosystem services at the same time.
Not wanting to go down the rabbit hole on this one, but how the hell do you manage animal welfare through a satellite?
Well, the satellite does not manage animal welfare. The animal welfare is measured on the ground.
Oh, got you. I thought you had some crazy radar that looks at, like, I don't know, the internal workings of a cow.
Yeah, I wish. Yeah.
Cool. So you're building out those tools, and you've just done your first carbon credit project in New South Wales, which is amazing. Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah.
How long have you been in development with the platform then?
Regen Network's been at this since April of 2018, so a little bit over 2 years now. We started really deeply focused on what are the tools that can help us get out of this climate change mess, not only in terms of carbon and greenhouse gases, but also in terms of biodiversity and all the social harm that happens along with it, right? So starting at that point, focused on building the technological infrastructure that will allow many, many different applications to be engaged in real deep world change efforts.
There must be a real strong guiding philosophy that kind of guides your ecosystem around the idea of prioritizing the commons and deprioritizing private interest groups, including governments, as the proprietors of that information. Would that be a unifying feature of what would help you decide whether or not you're going to do a project or not?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, this ties right in with the new agreements concept, that ultimately what we hope this tool can be is of service to our society, of service to individual human beings, of service to scientists, of service to even corporate entities and governments. It is a tool that they can use and utilize and trust and have others trust, through which they can make agreements with various parties. So, for example, the ranch in New South Wales, we are verifying the fact that over time they are increasing the resiliency and health of their landscape. Now, someone else is then buying a carbon credit, which is basically like saying, I want to get into agreement with you about this. If you create positive benefit for your landscape, I would like to reward you financially for that and receive some sort of ecological offset that I can use for my company, my company's ecological accounting. And that's one example of an agreement.
I'm interested in how you navigate the challenge of trying to advocate for the commons, but then holding your assets and your capital within a private company, is it? How do you navigate that Like, what are you offering your investors as a return if ultimately your goal is to be of service to the commons? And it's a challenge many mission-driven organizations have to encounter. I'm just interested to know how you've engaged with it.
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. So we have a for-profit company, Regen Network Development Incorporated. We have a nonprofit foundation that's associated with our work called Regen Foundation. Mm-hmm. And then we have a commons development, which we just refer to as Regen Network as a whole. That includes all sorts of validators, that includes all sorts of partners, various different stakeholders that may engage with Regen Ledger, which is the distributed ledger technology at the base of this. Right now, we're fundraising through a private token sale of our governing token of that commons technology. So if you were to participate in the Regen Network token sale, you would get Regen tokens, which gives you the rights to participate in governance, and it gives you the rights to block rewards and inflation mechanisms on the chain itself. So you're not actually investing into our for-profit company. You're investing into the development of the commons.
Have you raised finance into the not-for-profit or into the private company in the past?
We've raised about just over $2 million total in our total fundraising. Only about 150,000 of that has been money that we've raised for our for-profit entity. Some of the money that we're raising through the commons is then going to be endowed into the foundation right at the launch of our chain, so that the foundation can then, in a very arm's reach way, and help facilitate the workings of the commons technology.
And is the chain live now?
The chain is not live yet. We've run a number of test nets. Our last test net had 75 validators on it, and it was extremely successful in terms of offering value to the Cosmos community. Our main net is aiming to launch in February of 2021.
Awesome. How much are you trying to raise from your token sale?
Yeah, we have another $4 million that we're targeting over the next 6 months or so.
And are people allowed to put in $10, or is it like minimum investments?
There's a minimum investment size of $5,000.
Okay.
So they then stake their tokens on a validator. And then with that stake, they are able to participate in governance. So whenever there's a governance decision that comes up, you get pinged on your app and you are able to put in your vote depending on the amount of stake that you have.
I mean, that's all like the technical side of what it is and how it all fits together corporately. One of my biggest questions, problems, issues with carbon credit systems in the UK, at least, these gold standard systems, they're all talking about, they basically sell futures for stuff that isn't real today. In my head, it's fine to do futures if we have a future, but if you're not sure if we have a future, and also it's fine to do futures if we have a future and the person who's buying them knows they're buying a future.
Sure.
For those listening, like when I say a future, I mean you pay to offset something and you think it's in the ground now. You think that work is done, but really that tree might take, or that square meter of soil might take 60 years to capture the carbon that you're getting credited for now. And so I think a little bit of futures makes sense, but like proportion to the problem we have. So maybe like 5 years ahead, or maybe 10 years at a push. I wouldn't do it, but I could do 3 to 5 years. I don't know what your policy on your platform is, but how do you think about that? And have you experienced something similar?
Yeah, well, you're getting at some of the key misinformation and opacity problems that the carbon markets have. Most people, like if you were to say, hey, I want to offset all the carbon for my entire podcast, and then you go somewhere to buy the carbon credits, you have literally no idea what you're buying often.
No.
You got some credits, supposedly it represents some carbon somewhere. Most likely, that carbon that it represents is actually just carbon reduction credits. So, some giant factory somewhere made a little efficiency on their smokestack and it was releasing less carbon into the atmosphere than they would have otherwise, and they got issued carbon credits.
Yeah, so no actual molecules got put back in the ground. It was just less than they had predicted originally.
Yeah, exactly. And so you're supporting a less bad world with that purchase, which is good.
It's not that exciting though.
That's right. We're at Regen Network, we're really focused on nature-based solutions and the carbon sequestration out of the atmosphere into the soil and into living systems, what we call living carbon. The other piece that you're really focused on with your question is transparency. if you were to offset the carbon for your podcast, you could have on your website, like, hey, here's my little portfolio of carbon offsets. Someone could click into them and get a nice, beautiful page about what the story behind that carbon credit. And then they could click into that and actually get the data behind it. What was the methodology that was used? How do we know that actually happened? What does it actually represent? And that goes for what we call ex post credits, which is credits that are based off of carbon that was sequestered this last year. But it also goes for ex ante credits, which is carbon that's based in the future. But in either case, the clear and open transparency of that agreement is really, really important for you and for the people that you're saying that you've offset your carbon to.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, there's nothing inherently wrong about selling a long future on something, but not to be confused with something that was post, and already the work already being done. With all of that said, and I couldn't agree more that the transparency and empowering people to make their own choices about that is the priority, and that's what makes it good. Having said that, within your app, how does it all work, and what view do you take on that?
We have a project page for each of our projects, which describes in detail the site itself, the ranchers themselves, the cows themselves, how they're moved about, what management strategies do they use. It shows some photos of the landscape. It has some of the technical science behind the positive ecological changes. So the carbon sequestration rates, in the case of this one site, they've gone from 2% carbon to 4.5% carbon in their soil over time. They've planted thousands of trees. They've rehabilitated the waterway that runs through their site. I mean, wow, tons of beautiful stats. Then we have a whole documentation section, which is much more dry. What exactly was the methodology? How exactly does it work? How do we calculate the GHG emissions? But for some people, that's what they need to see. And so that needs to be there as well. Anytime anyone who bought one of those carbon credits wants to display to anyone else what they are involved in terms of carbon sequestration, they can easily do that.
And so right now, where we sit today on the 19th of August, what is the main thing you as the CEO are trying to move forwards on, get over the hill? Are you trying to raise cash? Are you desperate for new projects? It's always like a supply and demand thing, isn't it? We've got loads of customers, but we don't have anyone to grow anything, or we've got those, but we need investment. What's your biggest challenge right now you're solving?
We have so many good connections with farmers and ranchers that want to get paid for their ecological impact. They're lined up and ready to go. We have a huge spreadsheet of projects that are ready to come on board and get paid for ecological impact. What we need is the other side of that two-sided marketplace. We need more companies that are interested in purchasing innovative carbon credits to offset and to meet their carbon neutrality goals. Any of those folks out there that are listening in, if you run a company or someone who would be interested in investing into innovative carbon credits, please send them our way. We'd love to chat with them.
Sweet. Well, and just to get practical for a second, with my business, which I don't really talk about on here very often, or I don't think I have talked about it at all, but because it's practical, I will, which is our carbon. We help small businesses who want to do good to figure out what their carbon emissions are, to reduce what they can, and then to offset what they can't, and then set goals and get better over time. And one of the things we reward them for is getting better data over time, because we have a evidence quality score. We stack it all up against the GHG standards. We did the ISO training, which has all that sort of standard methodology in it. And so we try and get them to be better at capturing the data in their accounting effectively. And then we try and sell them premium quality offsets, stuff that they can't avoid. And we do that currently with our friends called the Future Forest Company up in Scotland, who are doing really good work. I would never buy an offset for my clients that I don't know where it is. It would be, can you answer these questions? Where is it? How do I know you haven't sold it to anybody else? And can I see it, please? If I can't see it, then I can't verify that it's not already done. And if you can't prove to me that you haven't sold it to anybody else, or I'm not satisfied that this is a permanent record in a way that would be verifiable, then I wouldn't be happy. So for me, those three questions need satisfying. I guess my question is, if I wanted to stipulate that I only wanted to buy post credits on the Regen network, can I make that requirement?
Absolutely. So again, we're early on. In this case, the first project that we issued is ex post credits only.
It is post.
Um, it is, yeah.
Hey,
Yeah.
okay, that's good. We can do
Yes, that's,
something.
and in the future, we hope to have all these filters that you can like filter for the place that you want credits from, the type of credit, what kind of agricultural system is it? Is it ex post or ex ante? And the corporation could then filter for everything that they want, and then out would pop, these three projects fit your filter.
So if I paid $20 for a ton of CO2e offset from your New South Wales farm through your platform,
Uh-huh.
how much money would they get? How much money would you get?
The aim for our company is to try to shift the balance here. So as you know, and a lot of your viewers probably don't know, when a carbon credit is purchased by a party, only about, in some cases, 20%, but usually between 20 and 40% ends up in the hands of the people that actually sequestered the carbon or did the reduction themselves. In our platform, we're trying to flip that so that we get somewhere around 70 to 80% of the final payment cost of the credit into the hands of the land stewards themselves. And the reason we're so interested in that is not because we care so much about those farmers and their farmers' families in those rural communities, which we do, but because we want their friends to participate. We want all those other farmers who haven't yet switched to regenerative agriculture to be like, wow, I actually think I could make more money if I switch practices and start getting paid for my ecological regeneration at the same time.
Sweet. Why did you choose from the Bay Area? I mean, obviously your trees are at risk of getting burnt down there, but they're at risk of getting burnt down in Australia too. Why did you go to Australia for your first farmer?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, our remote sensing technology allows us to do this anywhere in the world without flying anywhere.
Nice.
Right. So yeah, we have a PhD remote sensing scientist that is building algorithms, building methodologies for us to be able to tell what's actually happening on the ground. In this case, this group called Impact Ag Partners in Australia approached us and said, hey, we've been trying to work with the Australian carbon credit units program with the Australian government, and it is so expensive. It is such a headache. It's so laborious. And we're not even sure if we're going to come out the other end with getting an approval for this, even though we've raised carbon rates from 2% to 4.5%. And we continue to, they said, could we work with you guys to issue issue these credits? And they've been incredible partners working with us as an early adopter on our platform. We're still figuring out, the details of a lot of these things, the whole legalities and everything. And it's been great to work with them, and it was a perfect setup for both of us.
Are you seeing yourselves as a bit of an alternative to a gold standard or Vera type process for people that want to produce and measure and then sell their carbon?
There's two layers to that, to answer that question. First, yes, if you're thinking about our carbon credits themselves, our grasslands, carbon plus grasslands methodology is an alternative to some of the methodologies that Vera or Gold Standard are putting out there. It reduces the cost of baselining, it reduces the barriers to entrance for farmers, etc. It's got a lot of value in that way. So yes. On the other hand, we are also a potential technology provider for both Gold Standard and Vera. So we have connections with them. We have ongoing conversations with both of those companies, and maybe that we end up offering our open source infrastructure for them to build on top of, to help create transparency around the fact that their credits are not double counted, and that the provenance of these things is really clear.
I'm with you on that. I guess I did mean the first part, which was like from the farmer's perspective. I have some land. Oh no, Vera's 10 grand to get verified. If I'm like, I got a field, dude, let's grow some trees and do some shit.
Sure.
What is it prohibitive for me as a farmer? What do I have to pay you, or how does it work?
I'll tell you about this one project in New South Wales, Australia. It's a 2,000 hectare holistic management grazing operation. If they were to go through the conventional carbon credit routes, they're going to be asked to do 200 to 300 soil samples on site, so that they can then average those soil samples and get an estimate for what the carbon is in the soil to set a baseline. And then 2 or 3 years later, they're going to do that again. Soil samples cost somewhere around $200 to $300 a piece to take and then send to the lab. So we're talking about $40,000 to $90,000 just a baseline. With Regen Network, we use an order of magnitude less soil samples, So we're using maybe 25 soil samples,
Mhm.
and then we're using remote sensing verification and extrapolation from there to set the baseline. So we're talking more like 15 grand of cost of baseline monitoring versus 75 grand.
And if you don't mind me asking, who agrees with you that that methodology for getting baseline sampling is good enough? That this satellite thing does 9/10 of the work of a standard Vera methodology? Who is it that agrees with you? I'm sure someone does.
Sure. Well, yeah, we've talked with a lot of different scientists. We're in the midst of a public review right now of our methodology. We were incubated by the Nature Conservancy in the fall of this last year, and when we told them what we were doing, they were a little like, that sounds like a pie in the sky dream.
Yeah.
And when we showed them the data, they were like, wow, this is awesome, and we need to get more data sets to corroborate this.
It's really exciting to see other groups with other energy getting into this, basically, and with a good sense of steam and momentum behind you. It sounds like you guys have achieved a ton already. So I feel heartened just listening and sharing energy in this conversation.
Absolutely, David. When we're sequestering carbon into natural systems, we want to make sure that we're not fragmenting the story of regeneration into a story of carbon. Because there is a way in which we could sequester all the carbon we need out of the atmosphere, and we'd still live on a planet that is destroyed.
Yeah.
Right. This is an opportunity right now for us to sequester the carbon in such a way that also creates a huge amount of co-benefits. So water quality benefits, animal health benefits, social health benefits, food nutrition, etc. The list goes on and on and on. And that's why natural systems are the best way for us to be sequestering carbon right now.
No, I totally agree. And out of interest, you're buying and selling carbon credits. Do you set minimum standards on governance for the other qualities that you're interested in? If Regen Network's interested in water quality and biodiversity and other things that go in, do you have do you say, hey, hang on, we're not going to do this carbon credit project with you guys over in Canada because your methodology clearly doesn't care about water quality and we think it would have a negative effect, so we're not doing it?
Yeah, that's right. We have created rubrics through which we want to be able to measure the regeneration of the landscape. And ultimately, we would love to see the entire market of carbon credits move towards a regeneration index rather than just a purely fragmented carbon index. And we're trying to push that forward. At this moment, it's not hard for us to be picky about our projects because we have so many farmers and ranchers that want to work with us.
Yeah.
And we're gonna start with the ones that are the most inspiring and producing the most holistic health.
Although investors, there's a bit of trickiness around who you can take investment from. Any company in any country, any person in any country could buy stuff from your platform, could buy carbon credits from your platform.
Yep, right? Absolutely. Yep. They're voluntary carbon offsets, and just in the voluntary markets, just like Vera and Gold Standard are. So maybe besides those countries that have like international embargoes or something.
Yeah. But for the most part.
That's right.
All right. So we got super into the detail there, and that's very satisfying and enjoyable for me. But let's zoom out for a second, back out to like the whole world where we're actually at, kind of semi-post Corona, not quite post. I wish we were. Thinking about this decade and Trump and governance and everything else going on to fit into the wider story of new agreements. Why are you doing what you're doing, really? And why is it important? And what bigger agreement is it that you really think we should all be just signing up to for our survival, for our thriving? Have a go at that. Stick that in your pipe. Smoke it.
Well, man, we need new agreements. What is happening on this planet right now is not working. It's not working for our ecology. It's not working for the millions of different species that have gone extinct over the last couple hundred years. It's not working for human beings. And to be honest, it's not working for the wealthy human beings or the poor human beings, though it's especially not working for the poor human beings. There is so much obesity, there's so much depression, there's so much suicide, there still continues to be wars, and now there's pandemics that we can expect to see more of. These things are all connected together. The justice issue has come up, racial justice, sexual justice has all come up, flared up recently, and it's all the same story. These are not different things that each need their own answers to them. This is all one thing. One of the assumptions that we make is that I don't think that our governments are the answers. We have tried to put a bunch of stock in them and trusted them for a long time. And this is where it's gotten us. Right. So yes, I'm still going to vote. I'm still going to be trying to push for good legislation that could be helpful, but it's really in the hands of the people. And we now have the technology to be able to allow the people to communicate with each other in a clear way, to create clear and transparent agreements with each other, to do citizen-led science that can really lead towards positive outcomes, and to create financial mechanisms that incentivize the shift of operations from a degradatory practice to a regenerative practice. Mm-hmm. So yeah, the new agreements from my perspective in the future are peer-to-peer and commons focused.
I love it. I love it. So you're still going to be a tax-paying U.S. citizen. You're still going to comply, but you're going to be putting more time and energy into these peer-to-peer networks. Is that the right way to think of it?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, particularly talking about our company is going to maintain compliance with governance. In the end, if we can command the respect of various governments around the world, that's going to be helpful for the process of implementing and bringing about this technology in a quicker route. Mm-hmm. Legislation is still very powerful, even if I don't believe it's the end all to actually getting us to the world that we want to see.
No, I'm so chuffed to hear what you're saying, Christian. And this just frankly feels like an introduction conversation. And I hope that we will have a part 2 and a part 3 tracking the journey, really, because it has to be a journey over a number of years of seeing this stuff develop and watching the power of peer-to-peer networks go beyond just voice of social media into decision-making and capital allocation. And I'm very thankful that you guys are pretty far ahead, to be honest with you. Like you've done really well. I'm chuffed to hear about it, and I'm really enjoying this first conversation. I hope we can talk again and expand more on some of these doors that we've opened today. Hopefully you'll be open to that.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me on. I really respect your podcast and the work that you're doing, David.
Oh, thanks so much, dude. Have a great day, and hopefully we'll see you again, maybe even on this podcast. And just very quickly, what links should people go to if they want to become an investor or sign up, follow the journey, buy some carbon credits?
Sure. Check out www.regen.network. That's REGEN.network.
Amazing. And I'll follow up with you, and we'll get some links in the description below so people can do some of the learning if different bits pique their attention that they weren't aware of.
Perfect.
Thank you so much.